Hello and welcome to today's webinar where we're going to explore digital transformation in life science manufacturing. My name is Dwayne Butcher. I'm Director of Marketing here at Flexware Innovation. And as you can see on our screen, our two panelists, Scott Whitlock and Robin Lowry. I'll introduce them in a little bit more detail momentarily. I'd like to thank those of you who have joined us live and the many more of you who are watching this on demand. I heard from a number of you that you were not able to join live, so welcome to those watching this on demand. If you are with us live, please know you can ask questions using the questions pane of the GoToWebinar toolbar. Happy to field as many questions as you submit. Just submit them as early as possible. Will give me a chance to field them and work them into the discussion. We are recording today's session, obviously, for those watching it on demand. This will be available, I'd say, within about 24 hours after we end. So you can look for an email from me with a link to that recording. Just a heads up, it would be a great opportunity for you to set up maybe a lunch and learn with your team. Bring it up in a conference room, watch the recording, and it's an opportunity for you to kind of discuss what does this mean for our company? What does this mean for our specific situation? So just a pro tip there for you. Well, let me introduce our two presenters briefly, Scott and Robin. Scott Whitlock is President and CEO of Flexware Innovation, an organization that he founded in 1996. Robin Lowry, for the past 17 years, has been with Castle Hill Technologies, a provider of owner's rep services, and their Castle Hill is based in Garner, North Carolina. And as many of you on this call heard, Castle Hill became a Flexware Innovation company kind of in the later half of 2024. So that may or may not come up as we have our conversation here. So Scott, Robin, thank you so much for joining us here. And I'm just going to jump right into some questions and see what kind of conversation we can get here. Let's start off with a little bit of a level set, because I know both of you have advised life science manufacturers with their automation technology needs for, I hate to say this, but decades, right? And I've heard both of you talk about, I've heard both of you talk about the importance of not leading with technology. So kind of maybe just discuss that as we kind of kick off here.
Yeah, I'll
Scott,
jump in. Yeah, I'll jump in. Thanks, Dwayne, for the intro. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have a little chat today. You know, it's kind of interesting, this concept of human-centered design, and I'll just tell a really brief story. Early on at Flexware, I was developing some HMI screens for these operators at a GE Appliances refrigerator plant, and the operator went outside. I was doing a little demo, and they went outside the conference room, and they looked through the window in the conference room, and they looked from a long distance away, and they came back in. I mean, this is in the days of an old 21-inch touchscreen monitor, big tube monitor. And I said, "What are you guys doing?" And they're like, "Well, our fork truck driver is going to need to see this screen to know when to bring us parts by looking, 20 feet away on the fork truck out there in the aisleway." And it was an epiphany moment. This is 1997. Like, we got to build stuff that works the way people work. And so this concept of human-centered design, and so back to your comment, Dwayne, of not leading with technology. Technology should be an enabler. It should work the way we work. It should support us. Another statement we've created over 30 years of doing it. Nobody wants to be 7 layers deep on an SAP screen on the shop floor, right? I mean, we want to create stuff that works within the process. So now we have new names for things like that, like connected workforce and connected frontline worker, some of those kinds of terms. And so I think Robin probably agrees, we're not here to shove technology down anyone's throat or just do technology projects. We've got to understand the business value, but with the way people are going to use it. And ultimately, if technology can solve those problems and it has, good business benefit and supports the work we're trying to do, that's where we're headed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say that Scott, if you would have had a good owner's rep on your team back then you would have known to do that out of the gate. So I cut my teeth on the shop floor. So on the owner's side, right? So I work for the large pharma companies, and I know the pain points that we felt every day. So that's why we're bringing a different mindset to design and that upfront innovation. We're trying to bring innovation, yes, still in these companies that don't move very fast, right? So, but I know how hard it was supporting at 2 a.m. in the morning when the operator would call, and so I've always been thinking, how can I make it less stressful on the automation support teams that are out there supporting their operations group? So, yeah,
Yeah.
story.
I, I just thought it would be important to start with that conversation because as companies that are involved in innovation and technology, we're often perceived as pushing that stuff, right? But as you described, Scott, we're certainly looking at it as a business enabler. So as we have these conversations, as we go throughout that, let's just couch the conversation in that. So in your guys' decades in serving industry, you've heard a number of buzzwords over the course of your careers. One of the more recent is digital transformation or Industry 4.0. We were doing the same things decades ago, but it just has a different name. Well, let's talk just briefly. Why should if we're looking at digital transformation, why should highly regulated industries have this on their radar?
I'm going to let Robin take this one first.
Yeah, to me, it's to stay relevant, right? And to stay ahead of the curve. And you don't want to be behind. You don't want to be stuck on legacy systems. And there's a lot of regulation that drives that where we're going today. So you need to be engaged with the community and understand where technology is going. Otherwise, you're going to be left behind. So,
So it's a
Yeah, I just want
competitive.
to comment, Dwayne, on your digital transformation. Everything from Industry 4.0, met another leader in the space. It's Pharma 4.0. He's using that term, MES, IoT, IoT. I mean, they're just words, right? And uh, so we got to be very careful what people are. I've heard a few people say, they've had digital transformation initiatives that failed. Well, I mean, what are you doing with it? What does the word mean? Like, what kind of projects and things are you actually doing? Um, it is, as Robin said, still super relevant. And I think we're going to get into it, but deciding when and how to do those projects and how to maybe crawl, walk, run, how to implement properly are going to be important as we think about that. And certainly the regulated space, med device, pharma, life science, has its own set of challenges when you think transformation. I mean, it's hard to transform a highly regulated, slow moving, heavy capital
yes.
industry.
Yep.
Well, maybe unpack that a little bit more. If uh, clearly regulations and compliance requirements impact the digital transformation journey, maybe just talk about that for a moment. In what ways and what kind of impact have you seen?
But I often refer to like these systems. So if you think about a big facility that Robin and his owner's rep role would help create and bring out of the ground, whether it's new lines or a new greenfield facility, once that's all in place and you're running, think of it this way, that the concrete is 10 feet deep, and changing things, whether it's systems, IT systems or automation systems, or even making code changes, is jackhammering into that 10 feet deep concrete. Now, under change control, it might be getting 1 foot down deep, right? If you're talking about layering on a whole new EBR system on top of this, either legacy facility or even a newer facility, you might be getting 6, 8 feet down through the 10 feet of concrete, right? And those initiatives take time and planning and investment. They take leadership, executive sponsorship. And so that's the challenge that I see in the regulated space, is that, and really even outside the regulated space, is that when the concrete's thick and hard, it just takes a lot of initiative and inertia to get projects off the ground and get them to success.
And that's why, even in the design phase or these new greenfields, we find ourselves sometimes trying to scale back just to meet budget and get the facility up and operating in a timely fashion. These projects tend to take 2 to 3 years sometimes, and that's a heavy investment for our customers. So they do not want to stop. Once they get product out, they get a fully licensed facility. It's really hard to find the downtime to get things implemented or new projects put in place. So.
Dwayne,
Scott,
react.
yeah.
Let me react to that and ask Robin. So, like, what's the hindrance as you've seen it with these newer greenfield facilities or even new lines in layering on or applying digital technologies as they build that facility? What's the hindrance there? What's the roadblock to?
In the past, it's been they don't want to be the first, so they want a proven solution that they know works, and they don't want to be the beta, right? We've put in new filling lines as some of our the space that we've been in the last 10 years, and we were started with the first 600 syringe a minute line, which was novel for this area, right? They've never had that type of production before. And we were the beta, and it's really hard when you're the beta. It takes a year or two just to work out a lot of the kinks. So I think if they've got a proven technology, Scott, your team has done really well in that space where you have a mature product that works well, then they're more apt to take it on and implement it. But if it is something where it's new and you're really just you're a pioneer in it, you don't want to be the first.
Well, and you've mentioned before, Robin, the value engineering sometimes is the reason that some of these things get value engineered out, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's a place to save money. Do we really need it? We could do paper in a lot of cases and get away with that. That's a proven method. So yeah, a lot of times it's value engineered out because the construction costs take a lot of your budget. So that's what
Right.
we see.
Yeah.
So I've heard of a couple different themes in this part of the conversation. One, Scott, you talked on executive involvement. Also talked about just balancing the digital transformation with compliance. Um, we could go anywhere from one extreme to another. One extreme might be so cautious that innovation and technology updates never happen, all the way to maybe taking on some very high risk. As you look at that spectrum, what should the mindset of an executive be as they look at this?
I mean, the first word that comes to me is realistic. Now that's a challenge sometimes because this is new territory that not a lot of execs have spent time in. They may spend time in operations or quality or even IT, but the OT world that we live in for these types of systems sometimes it's a foreign language, it's a foreign territory. And so, some of I would say working with a consultant or someone like us who's been there and done that to just understand some of the pitfalls of projects like this, things like, you have to rally a good number of SMEs together to make these projects go, to make them work. I mean, it's one thing to fund them and design them and develop them and, think about how all they're going to interoperability with all the other systems and things like that. But to actually have it adopted and used, you have to peel people out of their daily jobs and give them the autonomy and time to go be the subject matter expert to actually deliver them, train people on them. Robin and I were discussing, sometimes you have to go find the biggest stick in the mud who says, technology, and bring them in, right? Give them ownership and leadership in this to help lead and help those execs know those pitfalls, right? So that's just one example of building the right team and freeing up the right people. There are a number of other probably pitfalls and things that, budgets as an example. It's always going to cost more than you think. So being realistic about it. So those execs who've been through like maybe an ERP implementation or other large system implementations and who know. So a couple examples there, Dwayne, but going in with a realistic, eyes wide open viewpoint.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would say from the way we typically approach these projects, we look at, do you have a master plan? Has anyone really thought about what it's going to take to implement what you're asking us to do? We just had a meeting with a client recently who is looking to convert from one control system to a new control system because the older one is outdated. It's a legacy system. And we're just asking simple questions. Have you done a risk-based approach? Have you kind of looked at, a master plan? What would you tackle first? How would you build off of the first one? So it's just simple questions like that that kind of drives a lot of discussion and getting the buy-in and understanding, wow, can we really do this or not? The master plan will lay it out for you. So
You touched on really, I could frame it as culture, the cultural pitfalls that can
yeah,
derail technology implementation. That's something I've been fascinated by over the past few years. That any technology conversation I've had with any thought leadership, culture always comes into the conversation. So it's great to hear you bring that up, and we're actually going to ask a few questions about culture here shortly. Um, so, Scott, you touched on maybe having a misconception of how much it's going to cost to do an implementation. Are there any other misconceptions you can think of that people walk into and they're blindsided by?
I mean, yeah, we touched on a couple of those, like cost is one, SMEs, freeing up people to do the work, timeline. I think people, if you get down to the technology weeds a little bit, people think, oh, there's an API for that. We can just connect it up. It's, those kind of simple, another misconception is things like people, they don't realize when you say you're going to implement a system, like you need staging environments like dev and quality and prod and maybe 3 or 4 of those staging environments. And then when you're testing, you need real world data, and it costs time and money to create that data to run through your test sets and your validation documentation and your scenarios, right? We've missed that at Flexware a number of times where, oh my gosh, to go reset and run that test, I got to reset up all my data. That's a day's worth of work,
yeah,
to whatever backup restore database, or to go, plug in data or things. The pitfalls in these kinds of highly complex, highly integrated solutions are numerous. And that's why, back to Robin's, kind of a master plan, having a guide who's been there and done some of this, and it can at least guide you through some of that stuff, because there's a lot of naivete about what it's going to really take to pull these off. If somebody has an off-the-shelf package and they say, yeah, it's roughly this kind of ratio of software to services, or it's roughly 6 months to install, or whatever. I mean, I think as a practitioner of this for 30 years, I'd probably want to ask them about back to your extremes, Dwayne. They're okay. Well, what's the best case scenario you've ever done this, and what's the worst case scenario you've ever done this? Because
Yeah,
the truth's in the middle somewhere.
yeah. The phrase "you don't know what you don't know" comes to mind when bringing in a guide who's been there with countless companies, the advantage that can provide. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about leadership. I'm curious, in implementations in the past, large projects, how involved has leadership been? And if you don't have a good answer to that, how involved should they be?
I would say for me, it's very helpful to be working right alongside the leadership. And since we're in greenfield facilities a lot, these ground up facilities, we have we do have the luxury of being able to have the ear of the leaders right early on in writing some of the conceptual designs and kind of lay out the design for the facility or how the automation is going to work. And I think that's where we can bring a lot of value and insight, and prevent the value engineering out of some of those technologies that we do need, Scott. And if you develop the trust with the leadership, then they're going to come to you. That's what I've seen it over and over. And not only on that project, they normally go to a different facility and they want to see the same secret sauce, right? The same thing you've done at the last project. Come do the same thing with us now. And you mentioned earlier too about getting the cultural shift and getting folks to change and buy into the digital transformation. A lot of times that takes some leadership change. That means someone coming in who has the experience and can bring the confidence that we can get to the next level, and who has seen it and done it. And that leadership, then it's driven down to the shop floor. And we've seen that as well in our experience.
Dwayne, we've got a recent experience with a big project with a customer where I think we've, stubbed our toe. It's a term we like to use here at Flexware. We've made some mistakes, where it was a big enough project, complex enough that we should have had executive sponsorship between us, the vendor, and the customer, and doing weekly or bi-weekly syncs. I've done this before with other critical projects. We did one during the pandemic with a big food producing company. And half the time those weekly syncs were, hey, how you doing? And it was, we don't have anything today, and let's 5 minutes and you're done. The other times there was stuff to unpack and stuff to work on. And so whether that's with the vendor like Flexware or your internal team, if you're doing this digital transformation work internally, but assuming that the front line or the management level folks are going to always be able to solve those things themselves, and not have that come up to some leadership committee, team, executive sponsorship role. That's a lesson we've learned again here recently. That's it's painful to learn, and we got to remind ourselves that these kinds of projects require that kind of executive level sponsorship and check-ins, to really guide and all the teams, right, with and knock down roadblocks. So just it's a fresh wound.
I appreciate the fact, Scott, that you're willing to admit things like that. And for those who don't know Flexware well, one of our core values is never stop learning, and never stop learning leads to the kind of transparency that you're hearing Scott say here. That we maybe made some mistakes, but we learn from it and apply those for the next engagements. So just wanted to call that out. Appreciate that about you, Scott. So you mentioned roadblocks. A question came in here from Paul. I'll be honest, we probably addressed a few of these things, but let me go ahead and ask the question, and maybe it'll couch a different look on the topic. So he's just saying that transformation in life sciences has progressed very slowly. And what are some of the key roadblocks maybe that you've seen that are keeping climbing that process? Anything come to mind different than
Let Robin
discussed?
take that one.
Yeah. So you cut out there at the end there, little Dwayne. So there was some roadblocks.
Yeah. What are some roadblocks, Robin, in the life sciences? Because digital transformation is slow in the regulated industries.
Yes.
I would just say, again, once you've qualified a facility, it's really hard to change. And we, just a few weeks ago, we had some of our friends from Japan here, and we toured a facility that we've done work there in the past, 15 years ago. And it was, for them, eye-opening that we were still using batch records on paper. And they just could not understand that. But it's one of those things where you've got set processes, you have SOPs in place, you have a workforce that's trained. You're not going to just disrupt that, because you got to have a return on that investment. And there is a return on that investment, right? You can reduce mistakes if you've got everything coming down from SAP right in through your MES system, and your operators are following a qualified EBR system that tells them exactly what to do. I think there's a lot of value in that. Now, how do you put that on a return ROI? Sometimes it's a little challenging, but those are those types of situations where you can bring in some new folks who understand it. They can help bring and set the path and set, the story for how we're going to get there. But they've never changed in 15 years. Never changed. So very hard.
So is one of the roadblocks just the pain of change?
The pain of change. Yeah.
One of them. Yeah.
It's human nature.
Yes, it is. pretty much.
Yeah. We did a workshop after the ISPE show down in Raleigh, Dwayne, and one of the things we talked about, the ROI for these types of solutions is very difficult. Yet, if you get a warning letter or if you get some sort of issue with a customer or an escape or quality issue or something, magically budgets are always found. So it's I think it's imperative for that companies look at that reality and say, are there things we can do? We all agree that there's a reason these industries are super regulated, right? We want to produce safe medicines for people and safe outcomes, and we get that. And when there is an escape or a problem or something like that, we all, we hate that happens. But if there's a warning or we see that coming, magically budgets are found, right? So can we kind of tip the scales a little bit more towards proactive work in this space, that attempts to solve some of these problems ahead of an issue? That would be my encouragement to life science manufacturers: is find the budget when it's ahead of time and not when it's a reaction.
Great advice. So I'm going to transition just a bit here and maybe focus in on technology specifically. Kind of a wide open question here, but what are some of the I'm not sure I like the phrase must-have technologies, but what are some of the technologies that companies in highly regulated industries should be looking to modernize operations? What comes to mind?
I would say connected worker. As much as we can, we're going to work in the way people work. A lot of these MES systems that I'm responsible for now is we are trying to make it convenient for our operators to enter data, right? We don't want to make it very difficult. So there's some biometric options out there for logging in, for instance. So you're not constantly having to use a tablet to type in a password that's now, I think, is 12 characters long for some of our requirements. So there's biometrics and just making it a little easier for our operators to operate and do their job, because it is frustrating. I've been there. I know how challenging it is to remember all the passwords for one, but centralizing one password, doing the biometrics, there's just some things that we can ease up for our operators.
My answer, Dwayne, technology wise, it's tough, right? Because you don't want to be bleeding edge. That's really painful and usually expensive. You want to be leading edge with the technologies that you're choosing. But back to Robin's point about being in the facility for 15 years, now they're paper. But at my example, the concrete, once concrete dries, it's there. So, we were even talking with our Hitachi friends about technology they have in Japan and want to bring to the US. And we're like, this is great and it's awesome technology. And you have 350 installs. It's incredible. But when you land in the US and you implement that stuff, you got to support it for 20 years. So choosing your technology wisely, knowing those kinds of support durations and interoperability things and supportability things. I think Robin feels the same way I do. You said it, Robin. You don't want to create things that people struggle to maintain. We use a different phrase. We're like, we don't want to create job security, right? We'd love for customers to be able to own this themselves. So I think all of those factors factor into the technology choices that you make. I think another big one that we're seeing is, I think it's coming sometime. There's going to be, the dam's going to break and the wave's going to happen where we're going to move more towards SaaS. But for many reasons, for lots of reasons, people are just, it's on-prem because it's close to the automation. It's an OT type technologies. But I still, we do all of our banking online. We do a lot of things that are just as high risk or confidential data as our manufacturing information. I get regulated industries could be more secretive and confidential than automotive parts manufacturing. But in general, this whole world has not embraced the cloud. And I think there's a point coming where that is much more common.
And I would,
Interesting.
yeah, I'd like
Okay.
to expand on that a little bit more. I was just sitting here and I had a thought. As you add new technology or advanced technologies in your facility. I mean, look at the screen behind me here. We've got a packaging line that's very complex, right? So things are getting more complex. I would say 20 years ago when I started in the business, it was Robin knows that ABB system. He's the one that knows how to do the backups. He's the guy that's going to fix the problem. So you got to call Robin. Robin's got to be around. Now we're having to rely on vendors from Europe, because it's so specialized. So we have, I think for Castlewood Technologies, what we've done is we've created these relationships with some of these manufacturers who are delivering the equipment now to the U.S. And those in the U.S. who are building equipment that are still very complex systems. And we have to build these partnerships where we can rely and not think that we have to know every piece of everything we've got to maintain in our facility. We have to rely on our partners like Flexware, like JR Automation, our packaging line builder, right? So because they're going to be the ones that can solve it a whole lot quicker than you can, because they have the intimate knowledge. They're working on it every day. So we have to get comfortable doing that as well as you start describing bringing in new technology to your facilities. Yeah, and we don't have the number of headcount, right, to run these facilities anymore. So we have to be available for our customers to support them.
I hate to alarm you, but it looks like the line behind you has stalled. You might want to restart the line there soon.
Oh, yeah. I had to shut it down. It's too loud.
Scott, I've heard you talk a number of times about technical debt and legacy systems. Um, Help unpack a little bit about the burden that those place on digital transformation, on making updates and maybe just modernizing. What does legacy systems, how do they play into that?
Yeah, I mean, there's, one of the terms I've used, in our integration world, we're more on the maintain and update and all that than the owner's rep business unit that Robin primarily runs. We're into this kind of the flip the house time frame in life where, most of this stuff's 40 years old, right? So it's time to flip the houses. And that, again, as we talked about the concrete analogy, that is challenging, right? In the early 2000s, we worked with a large pharmaceutical manufacturer that needed to shut down their operations and flip the house. And it was a 4 or 5 month shutdown where they had to stockpile product for their customers, that, life-saving medicine, that they had to do that for. And so that, the back to the concrete analogy and all that, Dwayne, the level of effort required to flip the house in a regulated industry and update that, get rid of the technical debt and get to more modern platforms or whatever, is not simple. It's not a weekend shutdown. I mean, we struggle in the steel industry doing this. We struggle but regulated industries, it's a much different ballgame. And to Robin's point about just once you got it qualified and up and running and producing medicines for people, if your paper system's working, the technical debt's going to keep staying there. So it's maybe pockets of improvements, interoperability stuff, middleware, data collection solutions. There's a lot of new cool analytic solutions that are out now, taking data from data historians that are usually part of the fabric of a solution, right? But then having new analytical tools, and obviously we have AI has some promise in this space. So I'd say eliminating technical debt a little bit at a time. It's very rarely a one big shutdown like I just mentioned, where somebody has the wherewithal to do that, to pull that off.
I think one of my takeaways there is modernizing is not simply adding to what you currently have in place. It may mean, and likely means, having to rip out or at least update the kind of the structural foundation there.
I mean, there's an MES technology out there that I think only exists in 2 pharmaceutical companies in the world, and it's being supported by a fairly large software vendor in the space, software and hardware company. But someday the people who support that aren't going to be around, and that technical debt is going to have to be replaced. I think there actually is a roadmap for that to be replaced, but it is, that's hammered down 4 or 5 feet into the concrete across multiple plants, multiple lines. That's going to be something that's rolled out over time and millions of dollars of investment, right? It is not just a layering on of a technology that, back to your comment, Dwayne, it is a replacement methodology to flip the home, right? And it's going to take time and effort and vision.
So you touched on AI briefly. It would not be a conversation about technology if we didn't mention AI. It's a requirement now, I think. But what role do you see AI and machine learning playing in compliance-heavy manufacturing?
I'll let Robin take the first one on that.
Yeah, I don't know, Scott. You're on the cutting edge of that stuff. I'm still in that concrete stage. I think the tools around us mainly is, we're finding it, useful in helping just some of the lighter lift on the documentation side of things, right? So even our clients are embracing it, and they're allowing us to use their tools internally because as an owner's rep. Let me explain that a little. We're not bringing our own laptops to the job site. Typically, we are on the client's laptop. We're trained in their procedures, so we're working just as an extension of the client, and as a result, we get to use some of those cutting edge tools that they're bringing to the table as well. And we've seen it, the AI component in helping draft the documents, some protocols. Is it perfect? No, it's not. But does it save you some time in typing things and getting some data sorted? Yeah, I think it does. But it still takes that trained engineering eye to understand if it's giving you the right output. And it's only as good as what you're feeding it at the moment. So, and there's language models, they got to mature over time, and I think it's going to take some time to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would just comment, Robin, that the documentation side, the manuals and even maintenance documentation and repair reliability type stuff, I think that's where we're going to see AI, show up and be more useful soon. When it gets to things like optimizing your batches or optimizing tech transfer and recipe management and things like that, I think we're still fairly far away from that. There's in the food and beverage world, and probably some in the regulated world, we're not even where we're so mature that we're using the golden batch concept, right? Where we can run to that center line or run to that golden batch all the time, right? We're not even there yet.
Yeah.
So to think that Gen AI is going to come in and magically turn your dials and magically, run a golden batch every time, we're just not there yet with the tools. So the second thing I would just say is people think I've heard this so many times, and probably a little less in regulated space, but people just think if we collect all the data and throw it in the data lake, we can go make, apply AI to it. And that's just not the case. You have to have so much context around this and teach the models like you're talking about, Robin. And
Yes.
I love this story. It was in a regulated customer, and our CTO Jason talks about this one. Customer paid us a bunch of money to look at micro stoppages on, I think it was a packaging line, but it was a high speed line. And we wrote PLC code and we did alarm and fault detection and we looked at the Paretos and we went in with continuous improvement consultants and we're working with the customer and, we get well into this project and, the guy who's running the line's like, I can tell you your problem. Your problem is when you run that kind of plastic, line runs great. And when you run the other plastic, it doesn't run so good. Well, none of that context was in all of our programming. We didn't know which plastic we were running for which vendor. And that's one small example of just having all of the context that you need for AI to be smarter and to make decisions or even inform smart decisions. So it's still a work in progress. We're not there yet.
Yeah. So not in the next few months will we fully embrace and see AI's impact on what we're doing.
Not in the regulated space, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's one of those things where when you're talking about the data, you still have to have a measurement component, right? So you may need additional instrumentation to feed that data to you. Are you going to go as far as measuring the variability in the glass? I don't think so. But you could look at your incoming product and give you some, and you'd have feedback from that. But yeah, it's going to be I think a long process before we get to where AI is really impactful in the manufacturing.
I like, though, Robin, that you touched on that there are pockets within companies you work with that are experimenting with and finding uses for AI.
Yes.
Most certainly.
Yep.
So we've talked a lot about culture. I want to just shift a bit and maybe ask a couple questions around culture. Have you seen where a digital transformation journey, maybe a series of implementations, have you seen where it's had an impact on workforce? And I guess impact could be negative or positive. How have you seen digital transformation impact the workforce?
I don't know, Scott, you got one? I'm trying to think of
Robin's
one.
looking up in the air for where he's seen that.
My projects are much longer. You get to see a lot more of the implementations, but mine are pretty long, drawn out.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we think about adoption of technology, I think where you can see some impact is, I'll go back to Robin's example of even the biometric stuff. When you can make people's lives easier, the frontline workforce, yeah, there is some. I was just thinking about another regulated industry project that we did where, the customer called us in because they wanted executive dashboards. And Jason, our CTO, took them through a value mapping exercise to really map out, like, what are you trying to achieve? And he did a really cool consulting exercise that resulted in, what if you're really trying to achieve these yield numbers and these quality numbers and these throughput numbers and quality release improvements and things like that, what we really need to do, step one, is not your executive dashboards. It's this connected frontline worker who needs to adopt this technology and know how to respond to stuff quicker. That's how you're going to get your yield, which was one of their business value drivers. So this idea of working the way people work, collaboration, connectedness, having real-time data and insights that can drive decisions at the people who can actually change it. If you think about it in the regulated space, one of the biggest drivers is like time to release. You go on QA hold, and that can be for what, days, hours to weeks, right? And that's time that you could have product out in the market, right? So using technology and this concept of enabling right up front or right when you build it so that you're enabling a quicker QA release is where that adoption and usability and connecting that frontline worker can be really valuable.
And this isn't quite related to the manufacturing part, but to me, what's important for me is also maintaining our systems, right? So one example I have is you go into a facility where the backup for a certain system might be in Scott's drawer. And now there's a digital transformation there that needs to happen, right? We need to make sure we have all backups in a central location where at any point, if you need to reinstall something, you're doing it from the latest backup. And I've seen that happen where we've implemented a control system, a version control on software, and it makes a world of difference. Folks don't have to worry about where is the last thing that we did on this line. They know exactly. It's checked out. It's documented. So for me, and that's how I operate in the automation space, and that's an important piece, I think, as well. So that's one of the places I've seen that transformation.
In my role in marketing, I've had the fortune to talk to several customers as we were developing case studies, and along these lines of what impact has it had on the workforce. Surprisingly, I heard a couple things. One is that, and I can share this because Belden said we can share their case study publicly, but Belden talked about how it really unleashed creativity within the organization, thinking, wow, if it can do this, if the technology can do this and give us this type of information, what else could we do? So not only in the plant in which we did some work, but across other Belden organization, other plants, they started thinking along those lines. What is possible? Something I wasn't expecting, but was great to hear. The other thing I heard in almost every case study that I've interviewed for is it's finally given us a single source of truth.
Mm-hmm.
Where before within the workforce, there's battles in no, my data is right, no,
Yes.
your data is wrong. But there's this single source of truth that everyone can have confidence in and kind of rally around. So just a couple of examples that I've seen. I don't know if you have any takeoffs or observations on that. If not, that's fine. Okay.
Very true. The unleashing of creativity, I think we haven't seen that widely. I would say it may be a different way. You know, it's almost like table stakes, Dwayne, where we use so much technology in our daily lives, right? And then we walk into some of these manufacturing environments and we go back to paper, or, you know, we get the eye roll from the operators. They're like, I cannot believe we have to do it this way, right? So if you can solve some of those like single sign-on biometric stuff that Robin's talking about and just take a few steps towards modernization that could result in better worker satisfaction, more creativity, right? Freedom to go do other things. It's not always a one-to-one path there, but some of those are just fairly simple to do. Robin references, you know, like backups, like single sign-on and backups. Those are like, that's not major digital transformation stuff, right? That's just like making people's lives better and lowering the risk of installing the wrong backup.
Correct.
Okay, well, I had a couple other questions about culture, but honestly, we've touched on that a lot throughout. So I'm going to move on to maybe an area around data security, compliance. How can manufacturers in these regulated industries ensure data integrity and security in digital transformation?
Scott, do you want to start with that one? I'll
Well,
piggyback
you're the
on.
one who builds that from the ground up. I want you to go first.
Okay. Um, oh, wow. Making sure that you have systems in place for logging in your passwords, right? Just the very basics. Just making sure two-factor authentication for some things, but not in the manufacturing space. I mean, because it gets a little cumbersome. You have to be careful. But also having closed systems. You're not allowing your manufacturing space to be accessed by the outside world. And we're running into that a lot these days. And I think at some point we're going to have to get creative and figure out how to do this a little better. But we have this situation where a lot of our vendors are bringing in their equipment and they have these devices. They want you to connect directly. They want to be able to connect directly to their systems and help you troubleshoot from remote locations halfway across the world. And we're always pushing back. The go-to state right now is you do a team session, you're online with the equipment, you have the native files, the backups, the whatever software you need to be able to make the change, but you have them join you on a team session. And sometimes they can take control and sometimes they can't. We need to get better at logging that and doing the audit trail around that, right? So, and if we're going to allow them there's some companies that just doesn't have the expertise in house, and they do succumb to allowing that extra connection. And I think that's very risky. So I believe there's some places we can improve in the industry there, Scott. You're shaking your head like you've seen that, and but the vendors are all trying to get more access to their systems in the field, and we're just not allowing it.
Yeah, you know, Dwayne, we talked about the terms that are used in this space and the term IT, OT. I remember hearing that probably 4, 5, 6 years ago or something like that. And, you know, I obviously now understand it, but, you know, back in the day, you had a fairly flat network at the plant. There wasn't a front office network and an OT network. It was all kind of one network. Might have had some subnets and some masking and stuff, but ma'am, now we're heading to firewalls and dual NIC cards. And, we've been doing dual NIC cards for a while, but the firewalling off of certain systems, like just to use Robin's example of just knowing who can access that system, if they can get onto that, their own OEM system that they installed at that facility, can they get beyond that? Could they cause harm in other areas? Most of the time we trust our vendors, but the more we have digital assets inside big regulated industries, it's going to be a target for hackers and bad stuff to happen, right? And sometimes just accidental stuff. So we're just seeing a ton of OT security type architectures and consulting and understanding what that all means. Back to your backup comment, Robin, we had a customer get infected by a virus at a not regulated facility, but had to rebuild every single server in the facility, IT and OT, everything on prem. They were down for weeks, getting everything back up and running. So it's serious, it's real. And the OT world, from a data integrity, systems, logins, uh, network architecture, all that is being taken much, much more seriously these days.
Yeah, and I can elaborate a little. For you gave me some thoughts there, Scott. That IT and OT and then the automation space, that level 1, 2, and 3, right? We're still trying to hand wrestle on who has control over what. Um, what I've seen most this I think where it works very well is when I'm responsible for the application, but my IT team is taking care of the hardware and the infrastructure piece, but I still own the application. What happens though is where I've in the past been on that flat network and I can manage my OT systems, my HMIs, and all the things that need to connect up to my manufacturing network, that's getting a little blurred. So IT is taking over a lot of that. So we have to rely on them a lot, and they aren't well staffed these days. So I'm in a situation now. We have a client. We've been waiting several months because we're waiting for the deployment of a validation system for an MES system, right? And it's taken months, literally months, because one person in the organization is the guy that does this. And it might be vacation time in Europe right now. So, right, it's pretty get close to vacation time coming up. So you better get in now before they're out on break. But those are the areas I think we're still going to be improving on the next few years. I would say I've seen this change a lot the last 5 to 10 years. The Purdue model has really taken over. The IT, it's really matured in our space, the life sciences space, a lot more, and they are, I think, doing a better job of setting up the firewalls and all the things that protect that equipment on the floor. So
But for the audience here, Dwayne, Robin, just we're riffing off each other here, but made me think of IT. Typical IT wants standards. They want to create things that don't break, and they just want to provide good plumbing and infrastructure that just works all the time, right? They don't want the 2 a.m. call. They're not used to that kind of thing. So when you think about OT networking, that's the world we live in, right? And you get somebody that installs antivirus on a machine that shouldn't have, and you got to interrupt PLC traffic. Or you get, to your point about restore and stuff, you get somebody that installs a rogue IP device that happens to have the same IP address as your filler, or something like that. It's not the same world and SLA model and service model as it is in your IT world, right? And back to your comment, Robin, about just a ticket. I need a ticket to do this. We need it now because production's down, right?
yes, yes,
This isn't, somebody, Sally coming in the next morning and finding the ticket log and go, I got to change somebody's password. It's like that. No, we're down.
got to get it done. Correct.
I assume you've seen some shift over the last several years, though, in IT and OT working
Oh yeah.
together more closely to understand each other's
Yeah.
worlds. And
Oh,
yeah,
probably 10 years ago now. I remember interviewing a student who we wanted to come to Flexware, and they went to one of our large pharmaceutical customers, and they were going to join I can't remember the team, but it was a 7-person team that was solely focused on OT cybersecurity. That's all they did. Think about the threats that we're talking about here and how to protect and how to firewall off stuff and how to segment and how to architect it properly and all that. And I was like, that felt ahead of the time, right? Now there are those kinds of experts in every one of these, IT departments at these regulated customers because they have to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think something we haven't really touched on much is training.
Yeah.
We need more training. Our automation guys who are used to working on PLCs and panel view pluses, and they're starting to bleed over into that OT space a little more. They're just not comfortable working in that environment yet. So somehow we've got to get that workforce trained up in that OT level a lot more, in my opinion.
Well, in general, we're not producing enough. We know this from hiring 40 people a year for a few years. I mean, in general, the world is not producing these very specialized, the colleges and universities. Manufacturing, unfortunately, is still kind of a dirty word. And so going into getting your engineering degree and go planning to work in manufacturing, it's harder and harder, right? So we got to take people that are, going through technology degrees and IT degrees and things like that and train them in this OT space that we're in, this really interesting MES digital transformation space that we're in.
Always learning, right?
So let me see if I can get this question in before we wrap up with a final. But Andy submitted a question asking, what are some of the key factors to consider when making a choice to go paper-based or digitally enabled? And he asked this in the context of a new build or a startup. So what are some of the decision points?
For me, I would say at a minimum, you need to prepare the infrastructure for it, right? You need to get the base layer in there so you can eventually, if you want to phase into it, if you don't have the funding up front to do the full thing, you can phase into it. But have your infrastructure in place, get the basic level put in that you would need to support it. I think that's where I would go.
Yeah, I would just use the word future proof there, Robin. If you, as much as you can, future proof it. And if you don't know exactly what that means, Andy, like we can talk through that, ready and enabled for that. I think, Dwayne, the other, that's probably where quality and your risk assessment team probably needs to look at some of those things, like what's the product, what's the size, what's the volume, what's the workforce, there are so many, are we talking about a, fairly light EBR type system, or what systems would you need to be paperless versus what systems would you need to just call it paper? Because when we say paper, there's multiple systems we're talking about there, right? I mean, it's not just one MES system or one EBR system or whatever. So there's kind of a complicated answer, but those are some of the things I'd be thinking about.
Yeah, there's SAP, there's LIMS, there's all the integration that has to occur with putting in these MES systems as well. So you have to, you got to weigh the effort, right, as you're looking at it.
Right. And that's not knowing, when you say SAP and LIMS, you're assuming big pharma,
Yes.
right? And so, not knowing the use case here, is this a, smaller, what kind of ERP systems do they have? What, is it greenfield? Are we plugging into other systems that already exist? One thing we didn't talk about, Dwayne, just real quick, is this idea of concrete being thick. There are what we call monuments inside of facilities. So SAP would be a monument. You're not changing that. It is a 10 feet deep, it's 100 feet deep concrete monument that's not changing. And other, your automation platform and your OEM vendors and all that are monuments that are not going to move. And your digital solutions have to be, sometimes I refer to it as the glue that you pour over all those monuments, right? And so back to Robin's comment about being future proof and making sure your systems are digitally ready, as much as you can. If you're going to put a monument in, you're going to build a line or a greenfield facility, having it digital ready so that it has those, ability to connect to the other monuments that might already be there would be a wise idea.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to get to our last question. I want to respect everyone's time here. So we're kind of at time. Let me first say thanks, Scott and Robin. I really appreciate you guys not only coming on here and sharing some of your insights with our viewers, but really appreciate the expertise you guys bring to industry. As mentioned, there will be a recording of today's session. Look for an email from me within 24 hours after we end here. And I'll just state that if you are early in your digital transformation journey and you could use some help, Flexware has some tools that can help you establish what your current state is. Important for when you're kind of envisioning what your future state is. You got to know where you are. We have tools in place that can help you assess some of that. So I'd be happy to connect you with someone from our team if you have a need there. Just reply to any of the emails that you get from me. There's been a few sent invitations to this webinar and so forth. Just reach out. So again, thanks, Scott, Robin. Thanks everyone who tuned in, and have a great day.
Thank you.